Okay, so I think we're ready to start. Everybody probably knows. This is Stephen Haynes, elder at Austin Avenue Church of Christ, leads worship for us as part of the rotation, mayor of Brownwood. But the most important thing that you need to know is Stephen is my friend. And I would be Stephen's slave for life if he asked me to, because my daughter shows goats, and she loves showing goats. And she was cursed with a father who doesn't know which end of the goat is the head and which end is the tail. And so Stephen is our goat rabbi. If it weren't for Stephen, my daughter would be goatless and sad. But because of Stephen, she has a goat and she has joy in her life. So Stephen, thank you for being our goat rabbi.
My pleasure.
But we're going to be talking about being a shepherd here at Austin Avenue. We're going to be talking about the faith-driven campaign, but I think it's interesting that you're from here, you were born and raised in this congregation, and every time I read about young people in the church, it seems to be people that are leaving faith, that are leaving the church. So what did your parents do right, not only for you to still be in church, but to be in this church in a leadership role?
Yeah, I mean, some of the obvious things, just, we were at church when the doors were open. And I had a grandmother that was also a member of this church and was here every time the doors were open. And I would say that both families, the faith was genuine. They weren't one thing at church and another thing at home. And so kids notice those things. They notice how disciplined their parents were in coming to church and making that a priority, and those habits you learn as a young child stick with you.
Yeah, that's awesome. So mom's family or dad's family?
Dad's family.
3 generations here.
Yeah.
And so your kids are 4.
That's right.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So what surprised you the most when you joined the leadership here as a elder at Austin Avenue?
That's a good question. I think the things that surprise you the most are just the things that derail you a little bit in leadership. And we can get hung up on making administrative decisions about, what color the chair should be, as for an example.
Which that's the color, by the way.
That is the color.
And we all love it.
But you in any group of leaders, whether it's city council or in the elders room, you get enough people with enough opinions, and it's sometimes hard to build consensus, and so that can be a little bit of a challenge, but also helps to make sure right decisions are made.
So how different is that leadership hat between being a mayor and trying to lead in that way and trying to lead here?
I think it's a little different. I think in the mayor's role, my hat is a little different, but just because of the elected position, by its definition, I bear a little different responsibility for setting vision and pace and kind of being the singular leader. And not that that's lording it over the city council, it's just that's the position.
Yeah.
In the elders room, it's different, where there is no person in charge and per se, and so that changes the dynamic quite a bit.
Yeah. So what was it like to come in with your father still being on the eldership?
It was great. I mean, Dad and I have worked together every day for almost 20 years now, and so it wasn't hard for us to work together. Probably the biggest challenge is that, I knew what he was going to say before he said it, and he knew what I was going to say before I said it. And so it might have been a mystery to everyone else in the room, but we both knew where we were going.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what impact has serving in a leadership role, has that had on your own spirituality or on your own faith?
I've kind of always been one of those people that held leadership positions. I don't guess there's a debate about whether leaders are born or raised or taught, but I've just been someone that's always kind of done that throughout my life in different capacities, starting in probably as early as junior high on. And to me, it's always been a spiritual gift for me, is to lead and to to administer and to take on that role. I mean, it's as simple as when you're in the high school and a youth group, who's going to start the songs, who's going to teach when no one else will teach, those little things. And, whether it was taught to me or bred in me, I was just the person that would do it, would volunteer when needed to. And so I think that really had a profound effect on my spirituality because it made me learn. If you were going to teach, you had to learn. If you were going to lead singing, you had to learn. And the teaching and the leading and the put you in a responsibility where you felt like you had to live out what you were saying.
Yeah.
And so I think it had a profound effect.
Yeah, no, I've struggled with that question. I think it's why I ask that a lot up here when I'm talking to leaders is it has had a profound effect on my spirituality. That like I'm not going to say I'm scared. I would be a little anxious to not have a reason to just constantly be thinking and praying and like have that next challenge ahead of me, spiritually speaking. And so, does it ever get tired when people just naturally kind of look to you for leadership, or do you ever wish that they would look someplace else, or is that something you're always happy to do?
No, I'm actually always happy to do it. I love being in leadership roles. There are times, both in the eldership and as mayor, where there aren't good solutions, and that's frustrating. There are times when there are problems you can't fix. Yeah. And things that just require prayer, and some things that are just difficult. And that weighs on you a little bit when you can't make it all right, when you can't fix it all. But no, the reward is worth the cost in that regard. And when you do get to implement something that helps, when you get to implement something that is a positive change and makes people's lives better or their spiritual life better, the reward far outweighs the cost.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so just since I've been here, so let's round up and say it's 2 years. We've added 5 new elders. We've finished a remodel on the building. We've hired 2 new ministers, and this congregation for our size is very active. Could you reflect on what just the last 2 years has kind of been like?
Yeah, I love it. That's my pace. I like for things to evolve and to change. And again, I'm going to compare the two in contrast. But when you look at a city and things are happening, one thing leads to another. Ironically, Chick-fil-A leads to new retail development, right? So Chick-fil-A leads to Ross, and Ross leads to Old Navy or whatever the case may be. One follows the other. And so positive momentum has a way of creating good things. Yeah. And I think that's true in the church a lot too. When good things are happening in a positive way, there's a feeling of, hey, everything's going well, everything's going good in the church. And I think we've seen a lot of that in the last couple of years with the change in the eldership, with some upcoming changes in new ministerial positions, that new perspective, that kind of rejuvenation. Feels like spring, feels like start over, feels like energy, and I think all of that is a good thing for the church.
Yeah. Just in 2025, just the lack of good ministry candidates that there are out there, and you guys have hired 4 ministers in 4 years.
Yeah.
And I think they're all home runs personally. Hey, at least 3 out of 4 are home runs. We're just that alone, but that didn't suck all the oxygen out of the room.
We're blessed.
That's incredible.
I think it's a compliment to the congregation. I really do. I think it's a compliment to Austin Avenue. I think it's a compliment to the community that we are getting candidates and applicants that want to come here and be a part of this church.
Yeah.
Because if y'all don't know this, when you go out there and you put a resume out for ministers, it's a tough world out there right now. It is hard to find people who are interested in any level of ministry, whether that's youth ministry or pulpit. If you look at the statistics, post-COVID particularly, was a dramatic decline in people that wanted to stay in ministry. So we could debate why that is, or what's causing those things, but it's true. There are congregations out there that have been looking for youth ministers and pulpit ministers for years at a time without being able to fill those positions. So the fact that we're able to hire, basically all of our ministerial staff, all 4 positions have changed over in a relatively short period of time, I think speaks volume to what's happening in Austin Avenue and the energy and good things that are happening in Brownwood.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so can I out you publicly as being the link to get to Doug and I both?
Well,
I mean,
I don't know if you're
at Hobbs are not going to like you, so
Yeah,
hopefully they're not watching.
I don't think I'm welcome in Hobbs anymore,
No.
but I'm not sure if I'm the link or Dad's the link. The truth of the matter is that when your position became available and we all kind of sat around as elders and talked about who might fill that position, Doug's name came up because Dad had remembered Doug preaching June Tyner's funeral and what a great job he had done at that funeral. And he mentioned the name, and then I remembered that I had known Doug and his older brother Kevin at ACU. I think I was right in the middle of them. I think Kevin's 2 years older than me and Doug's 2 years younger than me. But I knew the names, and I knew the family, and I knew great folks and great people. And so we reached out to Doug actually about becoming the family minister. And at the time, Doug said, well, I don't want to leave the pulpit. I want to stay in the pulpit, but I might know a guy. He refused to give us the name for about 30 days, but then he did turn around and eventually disclose that you might be interested.
Yeah. Okay, so changing gears just a bit, kind of what would you say is the emphasis of the leadership in this season at Austin Avenue, and how has that changed over the years?
I think the emphasis right now in the eldership is just trying to find a place for everyone. And we are in a cycle where everyone looks around and recognizes that our world is changing, our demographics are changing, the problems that we're seeing are changing. And I'm going to give you an example. When I was in high school, the greatest challenge that I would debate spiritually between my friends is why I was Church of Christ and not Baptist, Catholic, Methodist, or whatever. Today, our kids are facing those debates about whether they're should be Muslim or Hindu or atheist or agnostic, and our world has changed. And we look at that, and we've seen this generation of kids that maybe were raised in a different worldview. We see, both whether it's religious or political influences that are pushing our society in what we seem to be a non-religious way. And so I think the emphasis of the church is just, and the eldership is just trying to find a place, trying to find our way again of how do we connect with people. How do we keep those who are here and keep them happy and yet reach the lost? And that can be a real challenge.
I recall being a student minister when I was still in college and was an intern at a state school Bible chair. And there still was that mindset, if you build it, they'll come. It's like, well, you guys have a big screen TV and ping pong and foosball. There should be 150 kids here. And this was when the internet was in people's dorm rooms, but it was still 56K modems. But it was like, no, just building it and just winning people with circuses and bread is long since gone for the church.
We were talking about this.
You have to have a relational component or something they can't get in the world.
And I know we've got our kids are gone, so we've got a different audience. But we were talking about this week. We were at ACU and at Sing Song watching Allie perform, and we were talking amongst all of our friends, and we were all saying, you know what, kids don't date anymore. Yeah. They don't. They don't go out as couples. They connect this way. Yeah. Think about that, how different that is. That in a world right now that even dating has been set aside by technology. And how that changes what we're trying to do as a church. If I can't get a 16-year-old to be interested in dating a girl, my odds of trying to get him interested in coming, to worship are probably a lot more challenging. And so it's just an evolving world, and we got to try to stay up with it.
Well, and I just feel like that informationally, intellectually sharing truth with people, they see facts just all day on their phone. Sure. I just think that experience of living truth with people is going to be the thing that's going to make the difference for the church in the
Sure.
future. And I think any church growth method or anything else is going to have to be not another sage on the stage, but a guide by their side. And that's a Tim Elmore quote, but it's a good one. Okay, so let's talk faith-driven campaign. Mitch and Chad visited the Bible classes, 2 years ago or so? I think it was before I got here. They took some data, they started a conversation, and where all has that led us to?
Yeah, Chad and Mitch did go around to all the classes. There was a survey that was connected with that. There was feedback that was gained, and it was in that same vein of what I was just talking about. Like, how do we connect with people in the current technology? How do we bring the lost into this congregation? And there was a lot of feedback that was given, and a lot of that was physical needs of church. And I'm going to going off on a rabbit trail here for a second. But our view of the church and the building is kind of an interesting. Y'all have heard me preach and talk a lot about kind of our heritage, and there's this restoration movement view of the church building and what it should be, right? If we look at the Catholic Church or even St. John's and others, they're very ornate. When we went to Europe this summer, first time I've ever been to Europe. And we did, every time we could, we went to see a church in the local community, right? Why? Because, well, they're beautiful, right? They're ornate, they're fancy. And so why are our churches plain, right? Why are they not that way? And
is our theology.
Yeah, it's our theology that goes all the way back to Luther and the Protestant Reformation, and him preaching and talking about how, we need to be plainer, simpler. It needs to be about God, not about, building the temple, so to speak. And so a lot of that, we think that, but we don't know why we think that, right? If we were to put stained glass windows in the auditorium, I assure you there would be some discussion about that, some negative feedback that would come from that. But we don't always think about why we think that way. But our views about the building have been very guilt-ridden sometimes, and there's always this feeling that if we spend a dime on the building or the buses or the change, that somehow we're shortchanging the work of God. We should be about the ministries. But again, I'm going to shift this back a little bit to the world that we're trying to reach, and that view that it should all be about ministry and not about building is a pretty mature Christian view. It is the view that someone can see when they're like me, having been raised in the church with disciplined parents. It's not a view that a new person coming to the church would automatically think of. Yeah. And so impressions matter. And when we're trying to be evangelistic and when we're trying to bring new people into the church that are unchurched, how we look says something about who we are. Yeah. Now, we're not trying to become ornate. We're not trying to become fancy. But if you walk into a church building and it's obvious that nothing has been updated in 50, 60, 70 years, what does that say about the church? Your initial reaction before you've heard a song, heard a sermon, been to a Bible class, is that this is a church of my great-grandparents, right? And so part of, I think, what we heard from the classes when we went around and talked to folks is it's time to meet the physical needs of some of what's happening in our building, in the lack of transportation and the rundown bus that was at the time. And so we've been looking at some of those physical needs, but not just to spend money or not just to make things ornate, but from an evangelistic standpoint, that we need to make an impression on those folks that are coming into the building that may not have that mature Christian faith.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, it's just a matter of, I mean, when like you have kids, you're aware of the surroundings that you're leaving them in,
Yeah.
right? And you want it to look like other places that people in the community go and take their families to.
I've told this story so many times, and I may be going off on a tangent that may not even be relevant. But when Lori and I were living in Grapevine, Colleyville, and Austin was 4 years old, and it was his first year to play soccer. And we went out to the soccer fields on that particular day. The games were scheduled to be in South Lake. And if you've ever been to South Lake, like their public facilities are pretty nice. And as far as the eye can see, and I mean literally, I could not see the end of the fields. The soccer fields were plush green, not a blade of grass out of sight. Every field was edged. Every goal was aluminum. Every kid had perfect uniforms. Now, as a parent, me standing there making that, thinking, wow, I'm doing something great for my kid. How incredible, is this facility that we're playing in? And then later we moved home to Brownwood, and we came home, and I know Morris had a role in that, so I'm not picking on Morris wherever Morris is. But we went to the old Syntex soccer complex to play, right? And the first game Austin plays at the old Syntex soccer complex is, there's no green grass. It's mostly dirt. If you were on the wrong field, there was a big rock that you had to avoid right in the middle of it, right? And again, so some of that, those facilities have a way of impacting your view.
Yeah, they tell a story.
They tell a story.
Yeah. Okay, so we did faith-driven campaign. Last year, we upgraded transportation. We went from a 25-year-old bus to 2 new vans. We did some things in the building, in the children's wing and the children's ministry. And so this year, we kind of have 5 projects that we hope to fund. And I just wanted to give you a chance to kind of make the spiritual case for those 5. And so priority 1 is the seating. This is the sample chair. That is the color. So just make the spiritual case for upgrading the seating in the auditorium.
Well, I think it's a couple of things, and I think I've already hit on the first one that I would touch on, and that is if you walk into our auditorium right now, the pews are maroon. They've been maroon since at least 1991. I remember that because I remember going to a wedding of Tammy Blevins, and I know she was married right after we graduated high school, which would have been 1992, and they had been done at that point. So the pews have been that, what was popular in 1990 for 30-something years right now, and so when you walk in, they don't really match what else we've done in there, and it says something about the congregation, I think, when you walk in. Now, again, if you're a person of mature faith, it probably doesn't bother you at all. But if you're a person that doesn't know anything about the church, if you're totally unchurched and you walk in, it leaves an impression. And so to me, the spiritual concept is we don't want to be ornate, but we want to present an environment that doesn't cause an automatic distraction to somebody that's coming in our building.
Yeah.
There's other factors to the spiritual component of that. Tim has shared some comments from the folks in Mesa about the feeling of worship when people are seated a little closer and a little tighter. And the truth is that the spacing of the pews spreads us out a little bit. And so the hope is that with the seating rearranged with chairs, we'll all be sitting a little closer to each other or at least a little better for purposes of improving that worship time together. So that's the seating.
And I'll add a comment to that. We are just running so far afoul of the 60-80 rule that almost every church person agrees is real. When you're less than 60% full, it just feels like that nobody's there. There's so much empty space. If you're more than 80% full, it's really hard to find a seat to sit down, and a lot of visitors will not continue to come back if they feel like it's hard to find a place to sit down. We're running 30% full now, which you would think it's like, well, at least you have a lot of extra space. We don't, because those pews are so close together. And so we're simultaneously cramped and we're spread out. So a 20-foot pew can have 2 people here and 1 person here, but it's functionally full because you don't want to squeeze in that 8-inch gap to get by them to access the middle of the pew.
And we think that psychologically, we think that's illogical.
Yeah.
But let me put it in a context that I think maybe is a better illustration that people can understand. When Commerce Square was virtually empty, you couldn't pay someone to go in there, right? Because there was this perception that no one wanted to be there.
Yeah.
But as Commerce Square started to rejuvenate and fill up, and we got 60%, 70%, 80% capacity, all of a sudden they had overflow demand to the point that we now went out and had to recruit and build an entire new shopping center to the side of it because that capacity led other people to believe, hey, we need in there.
Yeah.
And so there is something psychologically that happens when you come into a facility and it feels full and it feels vibrant. And so our hope is that the rejuvenation of the seating will help with that as well.
Yeah. Okay, make the spiritual case for a roof. There you go. Easy task.
Well, they once led a person through a roof to see Jesus, and right now we could do that without having to remove anything from the roof.
Yeah.
No, some things speak for themselves, but again, it's functional, but it's also about impressions. We don't want folks coming into our office space and while it's raining and there's water dripping from the roof and stained ceiling tiles, and that's just not the impression that we're going to leave people with.
And the health stuff that runs with that, the risk of mold and mildew and everything else. And so for all of these things, I just kind of think about it as a husband and father. It's like, no, I want my family to have a home that the roof doesn't leak. I want my church to have a building that the roof doesn't leak. Sound baffles in here.
Well, it's a function. Y'all noticed that we've got the new speakers that were up. That was kind of phase one, and it has dramatically improved. But we also
shout out to Jim No for that.
Yeah, we also can improve it further with some sound baffling, some sound absorption. That's actually going to improve our worship in here significantly as well. When we do have some worship time in here, if you know anything about audio quality, sound bouncing off walls is generally not a good thing. You need some absorption. And so the sound baffling will have a practical effect of people being able to hear the message and the words. It will also improve the worship that we have in here.
Yeah, and I'll just say something like tonight when Ray was up here and you could hear every shift, every move, every cough. He's up here preaching his little heart out, wants to go into ministry. It bothers me that there's still as much noise. And I'm not saying that to shame any of you all. It's just a loud room. And the children are still here at that point. Like it hurts me for him. And if we can get that fixed, I want to get that fixed.
Absolutely.
So room 15, which is the room that we're using for LTC, HVAC, and room 12 where our young adults meet.
Well, I mean, I can tell you last week I was doing song leading in room 12, and it's April. Well, it's not even April. Then it was March, and I was literally drenched wet. It was so hot in that room in the month of March. And so that's unbearable here in a couple of months. And so we've got a couple of rooms. Some of y'all may not know that, but we've got a couple of rooms back there that have no HVAC. And in 2024, that's just not the norm. And it's sort of dysfunctional for the kids that we're working with to try to teach them. If they're not physically comfortable, their minds are probably not where they need to be on learning those skills.
And then the young adult classroom, termite damage, furniture mishmash together. It's just a demographic that we want to reach, that we feel like we can do better with the story that we tell them when they come into the classroom that's kind of set aside for them, right?
Well, and again, I'm not, my job in saying what I'm about to say is not to say that the mentality is right or wrong. But we got to face the reality that our success in our nation, our success in our community has led our kids to accept a certain standard.
Yeah.
Right? And so we know we've got a missing generation. We know that there's this group of young folks that are struggling to be in church.
Yeah.
And so if they come to the building and they find a facility that doesn't comport with their view may be wrong.
Yeah.
But it doesn't matter if we can't reach them and build them into that mature faith. And so that one of all of them really is the age group, the demographic we're talking about that needs to develop that spiritual maturity. And so that one to me has pretty profound spiritual implications to it.
So I've been asked this. We've talked about it some as a leadership. So the answer that you give here tonight is not the definitive end all be all. But what are we thinking about faith driven? Is this going to be a annual thing in which we meet some needs here? Are we going to do those as we need to do them? What's kind of thinking about a second time of special giving per year?
I don't know that at the moment, because we haven't had a lot of discussion about that among the eldership. I don't know that if we were to just take a straw poll of the elders right now, there would be consensus one way or the other. I think there are compelling arguments both ways. And let me just talk about what those are.
Yeah.
So there's one view that says, let's identify these special projects. Let's take a yearly contribution. It gives people the opportunity to get behind it, to get excited about it, to give to these projects the things that they think are important. And then there's another view that says, no, the elders should just, as a stewardship capacity, build those things into the budget and plan for those over a longer period of time. Neither view is wrong.
Yeah.
Right? I will tell you, I'm personally probably of the camp that I like the annual spring contribution because to me it creates excitement. I know when we talk about the chairs, this is a silly example, right? But there are opinions about that chair.
Yeah.
There are people that are super excited about that. There are people that are not super excited about that. But it creates a certain energy. It creates a certain discussion. And here's the thing. It forces the elders as a group to come together and set some objectives and some priorities and say, what is the next thing we think will improve the spiritual life of this congregation? I personally like the fact that the spring contribution forces us to have that discussion evaluation. I like the energy that it creates. But I also understand the other argument that, well, we're already giving, and we're giving at the max that we can, and so let's build that into the budget.
Yeah.
And all that's okay as long as we actually build it into the budget. So, that's something that the congregation can give feedback to the elders about. How would you rather us do that? Would you rather us set these goals and these lofty contributions and take a one-time contribution to address some of these needs? Or do you want to see it be a budgetary situation? And it'll be the same as the elders group is. There won't be consensus. Not everybody will agree, but feedback is always good.
Yeah, and we make it into kind of a campaign with prayer vigil and special lessons and, the games here for the potluck. Let us know if that's valuable, if that enhances your spiritual walk. It's a lot of work to do. It's also a lot of fun. I mean, I enjoy it.
I'll tell a brief story about that. I know we're getting close to the end of time here, but last year about this time, I had a client who wanted me to meet another client, and we went to lunch. And we're sitting there at lunch, and I don't know the new client at all. I've never met him before. And during lunch, he started talking about, well, the church I go to is taking up a special contribution here in a couple of weeks, blah, blah, blah. And I'm thinking, that sounds a lot like our church, but I'm not sure. Well, it turns out that he does go to Austin Avenue. He lives in Midland, goes to Austin Avenue, and is here most Sundays. He sits on the back quadrant of the church that I seem to not ever be able to make it over to. But here's the thing. Here's a member that doesn't live in Brownwood, that's here most weekends, that comes to church, and obviously he didn't know that I went to Austin Avenue either, but he was talking about that special contribution to strangers that didn't know that we were talking about the same church. And I look at that example and I go, that's a good thing. That's a good thing that people in our congregation are excited enough about the future of this church and ways to give that they're talking about it even among strangers.
Yeah. Well, let's ride out on that idea. Where do you see this church family in 5 to 10 years? What's some things that you'd like to see?
You know, it's always hard as an elder because as a mayor, I want to put things into numerics. Right? I want to, this is where I want Brownwood to be from an economic standpoint and growth, and I can name businesses. It's really hard when you get to the spiritual realm. But I'll be honest with you, I want to see the spiritual level of our congregation grow, but I also want to see us lay a foundation that this church is here 60, 70, 80, 100 years from now. And that's going to take some effort. It's going to take some intentionality to make sure that we're reaching the next generations. And then we need to help those generations mature and grow into that deeper faith. But ultimately, I would like nothing more than to see the type of church that when my kids come back, even if it's just visiting, this is a place where I want to be.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Next week is Joel Luker. We'll be talking children's homes, so come back for that. Thank you.